Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the podcast. We are Coco and Daltz. We do real reviews. We're real people. Did I do that right?
I think you did.
Okay, so real reviews would be R-E-E-L.
I mean, your name is in the title, so you can do whatever you want.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can I do show tunes as well?
No.
Oh, so I can't do whatever I want.
Let's not go that far.
So we're doing reviews. This week we are doing, or in this episode of the podcast, we are doing, which I think is episode 66, is it not?
It is episode 66. And the reason why that's important is because today, in our pandemic lockdown, we went back and watched the Star Wars prequel trilogy. And Order 66 is, spoiler alert, the order that the Emperor gave the stormtroopers to assassinate all the Jedi. So we thought it was important to do the prequel trilogy for episode 66 because of that.
So up until now, oh, by the way, I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Daltz. I was waiting for that. I was like, wow, he really loved the prequel trilogy. He can't wait to dive right in.
I got to go right into it. So all the episodes until this point have just been filler. We've just been building up to the 66th episode, so we could say Order 66.
As opposed to Order 69, which
is
how Luke and Leia were conceived. No, remember I told you can't do show tunes.
Oh, right. No show tunes. But no dirty jokes either. So there we go.
We've made plenty of dirty jokes before. What are you talking about?
So your turn for the summary. Go ahead, Coco. Try to keep it clean.
So in episode 65, we reviewed the original Star Wars trilogy, which came out in the early 70s, or late 70s, early 80s. This is the prequel trilogy, which came out in the late 90s and early aughts, which very simply tells the story, once again, spoiler alert, of how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. The first movie in the trilogy, The Phantom Menace, just tells the story of how young slave boy Anakin Skywalker finds the Jedi, or the Jedi find him on Tatooine, and he gets taken in by the Jedi. The second movie, Attack of the Clones, he's an older guy now. He's Obi-Wan's Padawan. Kind of tells the story of how the Republic begins its demise, the stormtroopers come to be, and then the third movie, Revenge of the Sith, Anakin's morph into Darth Vader is complete at the end. Luke and Leia are born. Their mother dies in childbirth. Obi-Wan and Yoda are the only Jedi left. They go into hiding. The Empire has risen, and the Iron Curtain has fallen on the Republic.
Really?
So
that was pretty good.
Yeah.
So you don't need to watch those movies if you're just tuning in, because Coco has aptly surmised them.
A lot of people would probably say you don't really actually need to watch them anyways. Or they would have maybe said that before the Disney trilogy, and now that the prequel trilogy is getting a second look, they're like, you know what, maybe this actually really wasn't so bad compared to like the last three that we just got. So
the deal is that Coco is a huge Star Wars fan, and I'm sort of like a medium Star Wars fan. And
Daltz had never seen the prequel trilogy until like 2 weeks ago.
Well, thank you. That's where I was going with what I was just going to say.
Sorry about that.
Which was the whole reason that we were doing this was because I haven't seen the trilogy. So, and going into it, I had dubious expectations because I'd heard nothing but bad things about this trilogy, which I call it like the middle trilogy or something, but it's the prequel trilogy. It's so confusing. Like, okay, so this is supposed to be episode 1, 2, and 3, even though Star Wars, the original New Hope, was the first movie, and then Empire Strikes Back was the second movie, and then Return of the Jedi, the third movie. So, like, it's just too confusing. Why do you got to do that? So anyway, this whole origin stuff, I was like, yeah, and I heard bad stuff about the Jar Binks and everything like that, and I was not really enthusiastic about watching this trilogy. However, so let's go into the first one. Let's go into talking about The Phantom Menace, which is conceivably, if you're coming into this starting right now, today, it's the first movie you should watch in this entire series, 3 trilogies. You should watch Phantom Menace first. And if you get through Phantom Menace,
it's all uphill from there.
If you get through Phantom Menace, you're and you want to watch more, then I don't know what's wrong with you. Because Phantom Menace is one of the worst movies I've ever seen of all time. Like, it was terrible. And it didn't whet my appetite for the series at all. It didn't really give me any background about what I already knew.
Fortunately, I have seen Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith many times, so I told Dalt, I'm like, the next two are much better.
Yeah, and you were right.
Yeah, he was convinced and kept watching because the Phantom Menace is. I've tried to watch the Phantom Menace many times, and I've only not fallen asleep through it once.
That one time.
Yeah,
because you were working.
Because we were watching it together, and I wanted to stay awake for it for you.
And you wanted to look at my reactions. You wanted to read my face and see that how I was, receiving that movie.
I knew you weren't receiving it well.
So Jar Jar Binks has got to be one of the worst characters of all time.
Yeah,
all the things that I heard about him beforehand were pretty accurate, and there's the whole racism thing that we won't get into, but it seemed like it was racist too. And he was all slapsticky, and he was all like backing into success, and he was just the worst character. Like he didn't belong in that movie. And I understand he didn't need to be in that movie. He didn't really drive the plot along all that well.
Well, when those movies came out, there was always a rumor that he was supposed to have a bigger role in the second and third movies, but he was so hated after the first that, George Lucas had to just cut him out of the next two completely. But about 5 years ago, some fan posted some theory on Reddit that said that Jar Jar was supposed to have a bigger role in the second and third movies because he was supposed to be a villain. He was supposed to be, along with Palpatine, one of the masterminds, I guess, of bringing down the Empire or the Republic.
Right.
And the guy who played Jar Jar sort of confirmed it without coming out and saying that was correct. Like he was like, well, George Lucas is the only person who can really tell you what he had in mind for that. But then he also said oh yeah, and we did tape a scene where Palpatine tells Jar Jar, his plans for bringing about the Empire, and so he confirmed it without actually confirming it. But thank God, George Lucas cut Jar Jar out of the next two movies because Jar Jar made that movie completely unwatchable.
That ruined that movie for me. It was completely awful, and I didn't have any sympathy for that character whatsoever.
And even without Jar Jar, that movie didn't need to be made. Like, you don't need 2.5 hours of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan watching Anakin do a pod race on Tatooine. The Phantom Menace could have been condensed into 20 or 30 minutes tacked onto Attack of the Clones. Mm-hmm. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon go to Naboo to get Queen Amidala to take her to Coruscant for some treaty signing or something, and they have ship troubles and they land on Tatooine, and there they find young Anakin who's strong with the Force, and they manage to buy his freedom and take him to Coruscant, and then 30 minutes later, now he's teenage Anakin.
Yeah.
The Phantom Menace just didn't need to be made. It was long, it was boring, who cares about trade treaties and stuff?
It opened with a trade war. It was right. Exciting. What are we going to do?
Are we going to see an
embargo?
We're living through that right now.
Yeah.
I don't need, 90s CGI to make it thrilling,
Well, and the race was all in there just to show off special effects and show off the CGI. The kid wasn't really all that good. He tried, but I didn't buy him at all as early Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah.
The mother was terrible. The acting in that one was brutal from top to bottom. I thought Natalie Portman was completely wooden in that one.
She was horrible.
And I had pretty high expectations for her because I like her. And she was not very good in that. And Liam Neeson is Liam Neeson. He's always going to be good.
Oh yeah, he is excellent.
And he was reliable in that. And I wanted to see him. I wanted to see more of him. So it was sad that spoiler that he doesn't survive that first movie.
If like me, you've managed not to stay awake during the Phantom Menace for the past 20 years. Well, spoiler alert.
I'm perfectly happy to spoil this movie because I don't think anybody should watch it because it doesn't add any value to the franchise whatsoever.
The only Liam Neeson was good, and the only other good thing was Darth Maul.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
they had it was Darth Maul taking on Qui-Gon, Liam Neeson, and Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor, in a 2-on-1 lightsaber battle at the end for about 5 minutes, and that was the only other good thing about that movie. Yeah, the rest of that movie was just trash.
Ewan McGregor was pretty good. He was pretty reliable. He's pretty steady throughout the entire 3 movies of the trilogy, I think.
I told Daltz many times before we actually started watching this trilogy, the only person who comes out of this trilogy unscathed is Ewan McGregor.
Yep.
He's consistently very good throughout the whole
R2-D2.
thing. And R2. Yeah, R2 is always.
Right.
R2 is my fave. But Yeah, so, but he didn't have a lot to do in this movie. He just kind of hung around in the background, and because he was Qui-Gon's Padawan, so he wasn't really out there kicking ass and taking names.
So the whole my reluctance of watching this trilogy when it originally came out was that it seemed like it was the Hollywoodification of Star Wars series. So you had Ewan McGregor, you had Liam Neeson, you had Samuel L. Jackson, you had Natalie Portman, you had I think there's somebody else there, but you had all established big name stars.
Christopher Lee,
yeah. People that everybody had heard of, and I think that was part of the appeal to me of the original trilogy, was that there was these no-name actors, and they came in, and we got an introduction to Harrison Ford, we got an introduction to Carrie Fisher, and they were really good, and the chemistry they had between them was really good, and they were all sort of in it together. I mean, that came from obviously the first Star Wars movie, where it was a lowish budget kind of production, and I didn't get that vibe. Like this was, and then Hayden Christensen obviously comes in as well. So like all these big name actors and flavors of the era were popping in. It's like, oh, I'm going to get into a Star Wars movie. Hey, let's go. Come on. And Samuel L. Jackson in a Star Wars movie. I mean, he's awesome and everything like that. But that's at that point, that's pretty mainstream. Like the mainstream / edgy is like, oh, we're going to get Samuel L. Jackson in a Star Wars movie.
You said that many times. You said, oh, I don't, I'm not into like all the big names, in this Star Wars movie. And I was seeing your point, but then at the same time, like to kind of transition out of Phantom Menace, like into like Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Like,
please, let's do.
I think, right, because Phantom Menace is so bad. Like, I think Samuel L. was actually very good casting for Mace Windu, because Mace Windu was not here for any of Anakin's BS. Like, he did not tolerate Anakin's tantrums. Like, he was always like, sit down and shut up. Like, he was just not here for it at all. And everybody else was just like, Anakin is like that one relative who's awful, but nobody will say anything to him, and they're just like quiet, and that's why that relative is able to say like racist things and treat everybody badly.
At the family picnic.
Yeah, at the family picnic, because nobody in the name of like family harmony, like nobody will stand up to them. Like that's Anakin and all the other Jedi, and then Mace Windu is coming in. He's just not here for it. So
he's Samuel L. Jackson in a Star Wars movie.
Exactly. So I'm like, I see your point about we don't need all these big Hollywood names, but on the other hand, Samuel L. is really good.
And I'm not saying that...
and I'm not saying that you're saying that he did a bad job or anything, but I'm like, he's the one who brings like that Samuel L. energy to that role.
Well, there's only one Samuel L. Like, if you're going to have somebody who's got no BS, who else is that going to be in the movie? It's like, well, I want a character that's sort of like Samuel L. Jackson. Well, let's go out and get Samuel L. Jackson. Yeah, and so they did. They had that ability because of the movie and the franchise. What it was, it's almost like, to me, that represented sort of the mainstreamification of this. Not that it was not mainstream before that, but it's just like, okay, we're buying all the way into Hollywood here. Whereas before it was kind of like, it felt to me like George Lucas was making this on his own, and it was rebellious, and he was, even though there was money galore involved, but the CGI budget on this trilogy was probably triple the first trilogy. And you could tell because all the robots were all CGI and the planets were all looked beautiful. And
can I just say, CGI Yoda is an abomination.
See, now that is my point right there.
I'm angry about CGI. Now,
so that trilogy had nothing but CGI Yoda in it, whereas the bookend trilogies had puppet Yoda, right?
Well, Yoda wasn't in the Disney trilogy, was he? I don't think he was. Or was he in...
I think he was in like flashbacky.
Yeah, he might have been. Yeah, he was in flashback with Luke, with like The Last Jedi or whatever. Yep. But yeah, it was.
But he was not. He was CGI there, though. I think, was he not?
I don't know. He might have been. Well, he was a Force ghost, so
right. So it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. But the only good thing about CGI Yoda is he did have a couple really good lightsaber duels with Palpatine and Count Dooku. You can't do that with a puppet. But that's the only reason why it was like a D- instead of a total F.
In my notes about Attack of the Clones, when Yoda has that. Lightsaber fight against Christopher Lee's character,
Count Dooku.
Thank you. I had my notes that the research department provided me says Yoda kicks ass. Yoda's got like the mean looking down his arm, like he gets the lightsaber going, and the next thing you know, he's tearing into He's tearing into old Christopher Lee.
Right, he's like an acrobat. I'm
Right.
like, this guy would totally get like all 10s at the Olympics, and you know,
He's doing flips and everything
Right,
like that. Like
yeah,
this is not the Yoda that I know. This is
Right.
not your daddy's Yoda
Right.
from the first trilogy.
like beating R2 with his stick.
Right,
You know?
and he's like all curmudgeonly, and he's kind of mildly senile by the sound, by the looks of it. He's looking around for things. So anyway, yeah. So that you can't get that without CGI. So I understand that, but it just seemed like everything was over the top for this trilogy, and the actors and the effects and the storyline and everything like that. But yeah, as far as Attack of the Clones goes, so that's the second movie of this prequel trilogy. I have to use the right terminology, the ridiculous terminology. But I thought this is where Hayden Christensen comes into play, and I thought he was very good as Anakin Skywalker / early Darth Vader. He had the glare down, and he had the when you're in a bad mood and you're looking like one of those memes on Facebook where you're sort of your head's down but your eyes are up. He had that. He had that down, and it was like, oh, he's turning evil. Like we knew something was going on there. So I thought he was decent. I liked him better in the third one, actually, but I thought he was good.
I'm torn on Hayden Christensen because on the one hand, he had terrible dialogue to work with, as did everybody else.
Everybody else had terrible dialogue, yeah.
And his character was just kind of like a whiny, bratty, emo teenager.
Right.
So he didn't have a ton to work with. But on the other hand, I'm like, Adam Driver as Ben Solo in the Disney trilogy also was, kind of whiny and bratty and emo, and he was actually good. So I'm like,
Adam
that was
Driver
kind of,
versus Hayden Christensen.
right, exactly. So I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm very torn on Hayden Christensen, and I haven't seen him like in anything else. I think I saw him in Jumper. I think that was the only other thing I saw him in, which came out like 12 years ago, so I can't even remember it.
Well, he was in Shattered Glass, which
I have not seen.
He was really good in that. And he's a good Canadian boy too, so you got to cheer for the Canadian boys.
That is true. I do feel as though he did a better job than Natalie Portman, but I will also give Natalie Portman that in the third movie she didn't really have a lot to do except sit around being pregnant and crying.
And
So,
weeping, yeah. So I want to touch on a touchy subject that we should broach this. It's maybe obvious to Star Wars people, but in the first movie, Natalie Portman is Natalie Portman. She looks like Natalie Portman. In the second movie, she looks like Natalie Portman. In the third movie, she looks like Natalie Portman. In the first movie, Hayden Christensen's character is a 10-year-old boy. Right. And then all of a sudden in the second movie, he's 18 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then in the third movie, he's 25 or something like that. And yet Natalie Portman's looks the same throughout all three of those movies, and they're hooking up in the second and third movie. Right. So if this role had been reversed, it would be like creepy.
I know. Totally.
I think we read about that after. It's like, wait a minute, how's the continuity in this here? And then Natalie Portman's character is like 35, and Hayden Christensen's character is 22 or something like that. Like it was a little bit jarring to me. It was like, yeah, I guess we have to see them together, but it's kind of creepy.
And I just didn't buy the love story. I didn't really buy it. Maybe it's because the dialogue was terrible and the delivery was so
there was
wooden.
No passion.
But when they're in the little chariot going into the Colosseum at the end of Attack of the Clones, where they're going to be chained to the pole and they're supposed to be eaten by these horrible creatures, and instead they escape. Spoiler alert.
Wow, they escaped.
Yeah, but she's just like, I've been dying a little bit every day since you came back into my life, and I truly, deeply love you. And I'm like, this is horrible. Like, I have like secondhand embarrassment. Like, this is so terrible. And the same thing in the third movie. Like, the two of them are just like, it's because I'm so in love with you. And I'm like, this is the, like,
So I think the funny thing about that relationship is that their lines that they're saying to themselves completely seriously in their relationship are the ones you and I say jokingly back and forth. Right. It's like, hurry back from the store, dear. Meanwhile, it's like, I hope you come back from your lightsaber duel with Obi-Wan.
Totally.
It's just the worst dialogue, and there's just no chemistry between the two of them at all. And again, it just creeps me out because, like, weren't you just like, you were the queen in the first movie, and he was just a little boy.
Right. Yeah, he was supposed to be like 9 or 10, and I think she was still a teenager, but still.
But let's say she was 20 as a princess or whatever she was, the queen with the funny hairdo. As they all, I noticed. You notice that in all the Star Wars movies, the women have the funny hairdo, like Princess Leia, funny hairdo. But anyway, so she's got the funny hairdo, and then he's a 10-year-old boy. So she's 20, he's 10. And the next one is supposed to be how many years later? 5 years later?
Like 10 years later, I think.
Okay, 10 years later. So she's 30, he's 20.
Well, I think there's not that big of an age difference between them. I think she's supposed to be like 14 to 16 in the first movie.
Oh, okay. So she was like an Egyptian princess queen type
Yeah, because
thing.
it's really weird because their queens get elected or something. So
of course they do.
Which I don't understand why you want a teen girl to be your queen. That seems strange.
It seemed underqualified.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, ooh. Maybe get like Elizabeth Warren in here. Like maybe she should be your queen. Like I think she's got the life experience. Like me at 16 trying to be a queen, like that would have been.
Oh man, that's a good point. Me ruling anything at 16 I could barely rule my room.
Right, totally.
So so the second one being Attack of the Clones, and they're like you said, Coco, in the well thought out and considered summary about this movie is that this is where we learn about the stormtroopers, right? Like this is where they come to fruition.
So Luke has a line in The Last Jedi in the Disney trilogy where he says the legacy of the Jedi is failure, and he's not wrong about that because this trilogy, in addition to being Anakin's turn to the dark side, is also about the Jedi having no idea that Palpatine, right under their nose, is putting all the pieces into place to get rid of the Republic and be an absolute dictator. Like, they don't see it.
And they're supposed to see things from the future and everything like that.
Right. Like, they're supposed to, know all this stuff and be very knowledgeable. And instead, somebody has gone into the Jedi archives and deleted this entire planetary system where the stormtroopers are being cloned from Jango Fett, who is Boba Fett's father.
Oh.
Although Boba Fett is a clone of Jango Fett, so I don't know if that's really a father situation, but whatever.
Wow.
So somebody has gone into the
My
Jedi
brain
archives and deleted this entire planetary system called Camino, where the cloning of the stormtroopers is taking place. And apparently, Palpatine just putting his hoodie over his eyes is enough to disguise him so that nobody can recognize that he's...
That guy's not dodgy.
Yeah, like a Sith Lord in their midst. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, there's a lot of superpowers by convenience in this one. So, the second movie is also... This is where the Jedi are slaughtered, essentially, right? Or is that the third one?
That's the third movie.
Okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself, but...
Well... Some of the Jedi are slaughtered at the end of this movie because when they're in the Colosseum and
Right.
the Jedi come to help them, and the stormtroopers come to help them, there's... Yeah, the battle droids take some of the Jedi out. So the Jedi are reduced in number.
They're shrinking in
after
number.
the...
But how do they not see this happening? So they're all sitting around and they're saying, you know what, Anakin... We don't see a good future for you in this business. We're going to, you sit over there, but you're not a part of the deal. You're just kind of an apprentice or whatever.
Go to welding school.
Yeah, you're like, we got you sort of in an interim basis here. Maybe we'll pay you, maybe we won't. It's like a...
like a regular internship.
Like an internship. You're an intern, and we're going to charge you. We're not going to pay you anything, and we're going to give you a whole bunch of work. So they don't see his future. They don't see anything for him, or they see darkness, or they see clouds, or whatever it is. And yet they don't see the slaughtering of their own race.
Right. Well, there's the prophecy that Anakin is the chosen one who's going to bring balance to the Force, which he did at the end of Return of the Jedi when he saw the light and he allegedly killed the Emperor and, he became good again and now there's no more Empire and stuff. But you had to go through 30 years of Iron Curtain rule before that happened. But yeah, so Qui-Gon is convinced that this kid is the chosen one, and that's why Qui-Gon is so insistent on taking him from Tatooine to the Jedi Council, and then it's just nothing but pain and suffering until, many years later when he finally turns to the light. But
as we all do eventually.
That's right. That's what I did when I found you, baby. And that would be a George Lucas line that they would have to deliver deadly seriously.
Right. Exactly.
And audiences would bust out laughing.
You are the light force in my darkness.
I got your force lightning right here, baby.
Don't give me no Force lightning, baby. I don't think I can handle it. So yeah, there's a lot of that convenient superpower stuff where that just threw me off too. Is like, aren't these guys like omnipotent? Like, don't they know all these things? Are like, so let's say there's I don't know 100 members of the Jedi at their best, right? Mm-hmm. And there's two guys that are like it's the main bad guy and the apprentice, right? Isn't that the way they work it?
That's the thing I didn't really understand either, because
on the dark side, I'm talking.
Yeah, because I can't remember if it was Yoda or Obi-Wan or Mace Windu or somebody said that there's always two Sith. There's a master and an apprentice. Mm-hmm. But clearly Palpatine, Darth Sidious, is the master. Darth Maul was clearly the apprentice in the Phantom Menace. But then Count Dooku, I think, is also a Sith Lord.
Yeah.
So where does Dooku fit in? Because he's not going to be an apprentice. I mean, he's like 60 years old. Like, he's too old to be an apprentice, you know? Like,
there's ageism for you there, right there.
Well, I mean...
Global ageism.
I mean, it could be a career change. I don't know.
Well, the confusing part about that to me is that, so let's say there's 100 Jedi out there. Mm-hmm. And let's say for the sake of argument, there's more than just two Sith guys. Let's say there's 4 or 6 or 8. Like, you think that maybe one of those 100 would see what was going on? Like, are the Sith that powerful that they can block everybody out and then go through this cloud of doubt? Like, I don't know. I had a hard time believing all that business. Is like, we didn't see it coming. Like, in the third movie, all the Jedi are like fighting, and then all of a sudden they turn around and the guy's going to shoot him, and he's like, "What?" Like,
You're right.
I didn't see that coming.
And even if you obviously don't know about Order 66, like, you should probably be suspicious of the clone, stormtroopers anyways, army, because it's an entire clone army is built without anybody's knowledge. Where did these guys come from? Like, how do we, like, so there's lots of issues with the prequel trilogy.
So Revenge of the Sith is the third one.
Yes.
And we have many threads and loose ends tied back together again, don't we? I mean, I watched it. I'm not clear on that.
Well, okay. In what ways are you talking about?
Well, what did we resolve in the trilogy? Like, we must resolve everything in the third movie of the trilogy. What did we resolve in Revenge of the Sith?
So the reason basically Anakin turns to the dark side is because he has no control over anything in his life, right? Like, he was the slave when he was young. He was taken away by the Jedi for allegedly a better life, but his mom is still a slave. She stayed on Tatooine. In Attack of the Clones, he has like bad visions of his mom dying, so he goes back to Tatooine. He gets there too late. He can't save her. She dies after being kidnapped by the Sand People, I think, or the Tusken Raiders. I don't know, some nefarious group on Tatooine. And Palpatine, of course, being, a manipulative, narcissistic piece of crap, he's telling Anakin, like, the dark side of the Force, you can save people from dying. And
Is that the way he talks?
Yeah, totally. And Anakin's like, is it possible to learn this power? Which is exactly how he said it.
I was going to say, this is an exact recounting of that scene.
So Anakin is seduced by the dark side because he wants to have control, because he's got no control, especially with, like, the Jedi. Like, he keeps being told, no, Anakin, you can join the Jedi Council, but you're not a Jedi Master, and he can't save his mom from dying, and now he's having visions of, like, Natalie Portman dying in childbirth, which turn out to be true, and he's the cause of it. And so he wants to learn the dark side to save people and have control, and then...
So he's frustrated.
Yeah, I mean,
he feels powerless, so he seeks the power. And he seeks whatever power is closest, which is the dark side. Because it's easier to go dark. You got to say that.
Yeah, because, especially because Palpatine's filling his head with, like, well, the Jedi won't tell you about this, which, I mean, it's true, they won't.
Well, and he had a lot of good points. I think I might have gone to the dark side if Palpatine had been, leaning in and talking to me.
You'd be Darth Cookie. That would be you. Darth Cookie. You'd just be, like, over in the corner in your Vader suit, like, just munching on. Your lightsaber would be, like, along, like, Chips Ahoy or something.
You've thought this out a lot.
It'd be like a tray of Oreos. That would be your lightsaber.
I would be like Jabba the Hutt size. Cookie the Hutt.
That would be Like Pizza the Hut in
Right.
Spaceballs. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cookie the Hut. I like
You
that.
saw what I
That's
did
awesome.
there. Yeah.
I picked up what you
You
were laying
picked
down.
up. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So the third movie, Revenge of the Sith.
yeah.
Resolution. Darth Vader becomes a thing because Anakin. So the fantastic fight scene, the final, the denouement of it all, where Anakin and Obi-Wan are fighting in this furnace land or whatever it is.
Mustafar.
So discounting, you have to have a huge suspension of disbelief that they're not completely incinerated the moment they step down on something in this red hot lava planet. And even if they're on steel or metal or rock or anything like that, they would just completely be incinerated. So suspend that for the time being. It's a really fantastic combat scene, like a fight scene, and there's a lot of acrobatics, and Owen McGregor is really good in it, and it's one of the better scenes in those three movies.
I will say one of the things the prequel trilogy really has going for it is the lightsaber duels are amazing.
Yeah,
they're very
right.
choreographed. They're very stylized. It's not just like two people hacking at each other. Like it's really like all the lightsaber duels across the whole trilogy are really good. So,
and I would say it's safe to say that that's the best part of the whole trilogy. Like the characters are not great. The evil, good versus evil is not. We're not really revisiting everything. Like the thing that I was really surprised with this trilogy was actually the story is stronger than the first trilogy. So you've got the biggest bare bones of the story is that the origin of Darth Vader is essentially what this trilogy is about.
Who's an iconic character.
Right, exactly.
Like, everybody in the world knows Darth Vader.
Right, and how did Darth Vader come to be? Like, it's a fascinating idea for a trilogy. Like, let's do it. They screwed up the first movie. It was just a disaster. And it had very little to do with like, oh yeah, he was a little kid and he was innocent and had powers. Like you said, that could have been summarized in like 20 minutes.
Right.
And they didn't need that story, or they needed to do it differently in order to make it better. But I think that overall, like the trilogy, the story was really strong, and the conflict there was really, like, you could really feel it with Hayden Christensen, especially in the third movie, The Revenge of the Sith. Like, you really feel he was conflicted about all this, and that was really good. But overall, it blew me away more than I thought it was going to blow me away. Let's just put it that way.
The third movie is basically Hayden Christensen doing something bad and then being like, what have I done?
Yeah.
He kills Count Dooku at the beginning, and then he's like, I shouldn't have done that. I should have turned him over to the Jedi. He could have, been on trial. And, Palpatine's just like, you did what you had to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, it's in some ways it's over the top too. It's like, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. It's like, well, maybe because you got the Force in you, you should have figured out that maybe that was going to happen.
And that's, part of the reason why I feel like, maybe I should give Hayden Christensen a little bit of a pass on the bad acting, is because, that was all he was in the third movie, was just, being manipulated by the Emperor and then being like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Like, especially at the end when he kills Mace Windu. He's just like, what have I done? And, Mace Windu is just like, don't listen to him, Anakin. And then, Anakin...
Well, there's a lot of back and forth in this trilogy. And there's a lot of confusing behavior that it doesn't hold water in terms of the characters. Like, that's one of them. Like, he's conflicted, yes, but he's this superpower being, and he'd had in a lot of the scenes he knows very much what he's doing, and then all of a sudden he doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah,
and it's like one end of the scale to the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum, and then you've got like Natalie Portman doesn't really know what she's doing, and she was better, I thought, in the last two movies than she was in the first movie. But you've got her also as an extreme character, like extreme reactions, like, oh no, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm pregnant. Like it's just the joy, the happiness, the sorrow.
And that's the thing I don't get either. Like, Anakin is just boning Padme, like, right under the Jedi's noses. Like, they're not supposed to have, like, relationships with people. And how do they not know? Like, Padme is walking around pregnant. Like, how do they not know? Like, at the very end, Obi-Wan is like, Anakin is the father, isn't he? And I'm like, oh, you finally figured that out? Like, oh.
Maybe with all that time spent together.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh, they're only living together, like, in the high-rise.
And also,
like,
by the way, Obi-Wan, don't you have the Force? Like, can't you just... Like, isn't there a way, like, looking through doors and stuff like that as you're walking by the hotel room or whatever? It's like, oh, who's in that room? Oh, I see what's going on there. Okay.
Allegedly they have, like, security holograms of, like, everywhere on Coruscant. So maybe, be like, hey, take me to the night that Padme got pregnant. And then, look at the security hologram
Who's
and be
going
like,
in a room and who's coming out of a room. Yeah.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
Like it's, yeah, like you said, it's very convenient, some of the powers and powerlessness.
Well, that's the whole franchise essentially. There's a lot of, you have to suspend your disbelief in some ways, and there's some major holes in some of the plot lines, and it's kind of funny actually to see. It's like, well, wait a minute, that never would have happened. Not even in outer space. You know what I mean? Like, not even in a distant future or distant past. I mean, it would. There's no way that physically could have happened. But it just happens because it's the movies, I guess.
Yeah,
it's a Star Wars movie.
I will say, I think like the last 90-ish minutes of Revenge of the Sith is like as good as maybe not anything in A New Hope or Empire Strikes Back, but as good as Return of the Jedi. And I know how you feel about Return of the Jedi, but I will say the last 90-ish minutes of Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin finally goes bad and the stormtroopers turn on the Jedi and kill them all, and Luke and Leia are born and the Republic falls, and I think that's as good as anything in the original trilogy, because you finally get to like the emotional crux of this entire trilogy, what it's been leading up to, and then you just see how I said something to Daltz as we were watching this about how, even though Palpatine is like an evil genius and he like orchestrated all of this, like he needed a useful idiot, and Anakin was a useful idiot, and like the Republic kind of blundered sort of into this, empire dictatorship, and I'm like, this has a special resonance for us in these times that we find ourselves in today, because we're just kind of blundering into
new disasters.
Yeah, new disasters.
Yep.
So the end of Revenge of the Sith, like really, like it's good. Like, and especially for me, like I saw Revenge of the Sith in the theater, which everybody did, but when except for Daltz. But when he's finally Vader and they put like the helmet on him and he takes like those first couple breaths, those iconic breaths, like, oh my God, that just gave me so many chills, because that was like, oh,
the birth of Darth Vader.
Yeah, so it was great.
Yeah, I would say that somehow if they get rid of that first movie, like it would have been, so maybe they're just hooked on the idea of a trilogy, but if they had somehow put everything into 2 movies and trimmed out some of the extraneous battle scenes, like some of the scenes went on a little bit too long, I thought. So you trim out a little bit and trim out a little bit here and a little bit there. I think that you would have 2 really good movies, and you'd maybe settle out some of the acting. You would maybe even out some of the acting there, I think, and also more Samuel L. Jackson. That would have helped too.
Well, I cannot remember for the life of me who it was, but somebody at some point since the prequel trilogy was released said the prequel trilogy would be so much better if the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones were combined into one movie, and that was the first movie of the trilogy.
Yeah.
Revenge of the Sith could stand on its own as the second movie of the trilogy, and then the third movie of that trilogy could be the 20 years between the end of Revenge of the Sith and like basically the beginning of A New Hope. Like, what did Vader do in those 20 years? Like, more character development for Vader, basically.
Like
so
Darth Vader, the college years or something like that?
Exactly. Like Vader can't pass Calc 1.
He's got like on his helmet, he's got one of those beer things that's on either side of his helmet.
Oh my
with
God.
the straws going into the mask and everything like that.
I need one of those. That would be amazing.
A Vader beer helmet.
That would be awesome.
I don't know why they don't have that.
But yeah, so that would be a better trilogy, but that's not the trilogy we got. So the trilogy we have to judge on its own and on its merits. And I would say that compared to the Disney trilogy that just, was completed 6 months ago, yeah, I'd say this is definitely the second best trilogy. Like, I don't know if it's like time has just blunted like exactly how bad these things were, or if it's just I'm bitter about how wasted the Disney trilogy was, but I'm like, yeah, you know what, these actually really comparatively, nothing's going to top the original trilogy,
right.
But these actually really aren't that terrible.
Yeah, I thought that too as I was watching them. Like after I got through the debacle that was the first movie.
Yeah, that one's still really bad.
That's not only a bad movie for this franchise, but I think it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Like it was just abysmal. And poor Liam Neeson and Owen McGregor, like they were pretty decent in it, but that was awful. So anyway, get past that one. The other 2 movies were pretty good. Like they were not as bad as they were sold as, and not as bad as I think a lot of people are characterizing that, like bringing down the trilogy and all that sort of stuff. I think that they they held pretty well. They held up pretty well.
I think the thing that this trilogy has going for it that the Disney trilogy does not is that George Lucas clearly had a plan. Like, this is the story that I am going to tell in this trilogy, and this is what I'm going to do. And obviously, plans change somewhat because people hate Jar Jar. So now we have to get rid of this character or whatever. But
I'm so glad they got rid of him.
Right, but it's not like the Disney trilogy, which was clearly just kind of making it up as it went along. Like, there was a plan, one person was in charge of it. Now, maybe George Lucas had all the money in the world. He could have hired other people to steward this thing, and he could tell them, like, this is the story, this is Anakin's arc, this is Padme's arc, this is Obi-Wan's arc. Like, he could have hired the best people in the world to shepherd this thing and make it better, like the end product better than it actually was. But as a whole, I think it's still better than the Disney trilogy because it was cohesive.
Yeah.
Even though the first movie is utter trash, it was still cohesive.
Well, and it still had a plan, too. Even though the first movie was not good, it was still part of the entire thread. Like, you had to get introduced somehow to Anakin Skywalker as a kid. And that's how we did it in that movie. And it was not the best way to do it, but it was at least an idea of, we got to meet this guy, and he's got to run into somebody who, a Jedi who's got the Force. And so he runs into Liam Neeson because Liam Neeson is stranded on this planet or whatever.
And it brought a lot of people from the original trilogy in too. Like, now we've got like Boba Fett's backstory. So, and the Disney trilogy, that's the thing, is that George Lucas always said, like, the 3 trilogies of trilogies were going to be the Skywalker saga. Well, now the Disney trilogy has just basically made Anakin Skywalker completely irrelevant because the end of that trilogy is 2 Palpatines battling each other and a Palpatine defeating another Palpatine. And
spoiler.
Right. No. So no, not really. So, like, that's another thing that angers me about the Disney trilogy is that now, the family that people knew and loved in the first 2 trilogies is, like, just completely irrelevant.
Well,
like,
and
there's
it's
just
cheapened
nobody.
It's cheapened a lot of the storylines that you've built up with 2 trilogies.
Like,
you've tried to build up the characters and the histories and everything like that. And then the third, I agree with you. And we just recently finished watching the Disney trilogy, and we'll podcast on that next.
Episode 67.
And so I don't want to talk too much about those episodes or those movies. But you're right. I think that you can tell for all the failings of this prequel trilogy, you can tell that there was a beginning, middle, and end. There was a 3-act play, and you had it was clumsily handled in the first movie, but at least it was there. The characters were there, and the conflicts were there, and there was a lot of introduction in terms of why, motivations, and things like that. So one thing we should point out, too, is that George Lucas wrote and directed the first movie, which was the abysmal movie, and then he backed out and did just story on the second and third movies in the trilogy. And I think that was a wise choice. I don't know if he got pushed or if he jumped, but it was a much better feeling for the second 2 movies.
Lawrence Kasdan did at least one of the screenplays for one of those movies, correct? And
That's
he
right.
also did the screenplay for at least Return of the Jedi.
He did Empire Strikes Back as well.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So, I mean,
which was probably the best Star Wars movie.
Yeah, so go back to the good stuff.
Right. Yeah, go back to what... I mean, I think there were a lot of people really upset and really disappointed in the first movie with Jar Jar and everything that was going on. And it was not really a Star Wars movie to me. It didn't feel like a Star Wars movie. I don't know what a Star Wars movie feels like, but it's sort of like, porn. I know what it is if I see it.
Right, totally.
Or offensive material, or however that saying goes. And it was just not... It was not a Star Wars movie. It felt like a tangential side story, like something you'd see in a made-for-TV production or something like that. So, we're going to give you a little bit backstory here, and it's going to be a glorified car race, and that's going to be it.
And the pod race wasn't even exciting, like, because I mean,
it was confusing too. It was hard to follow in terms of where's Anakin. Okay, I see him there, but then who's the supposed bad guy, and who are all these other guys, and what's the track, and what are the stakes here? I mean, maybe I was just falling asleep or something like that, and missed the obvious stuff, but I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, no, the first movie was, I go back and forth on whether of the 9 when I rank them. Like, is the Phantom Menace number 9 or is it number 8? Because I really hated The Last Jedi.
Apparently.
But I've stayed awake during The Last Jedi the 2 times I've watched it, and I've only stayed awake for The Phantom Menace once in 20 years. So,
well, Phantom Menace is like 10 for me. Like 9 would be maybe Rogue One or something like that. Or, no, I don't mean that. But like,
but if you added Rogue One into the,
I would insert a different movie into the mix. Like, I don't know if anybody's seen Hardware Wars out there, but I would put probably Hardware Wars at number 9.
Wow,
which is a parody of Star Wars that came out in like 1978.
Oh my goodness.
So
we should try to find that on YouTube, and maybe we could podcast that.
I bet you we could find that because it's hilarious, and it's toasters flying through the air and irons and that sort of thing. It's really funny.
So anything else you want to add on the prequel trilogy?
No, I would say that if you can avoid episode 1, Phantom Menace, you don't need to watch that. Watch the other 2 and you're good to go.
All you need to know is that Anakin was a slave boy on Tatooine, and the Jedi land there and find him and free him and take him with them. And you already know that because you saw the original trilogy, and you get a little bit of Anakin's backstory in the original trilogy.
And what you should do if you don't watch that first one is just have a silent tip of the cap to Liam Neeson for putting in a solid, good effort.
Yes.
And yet he could not save that movie. He's like, you don't have to watch the movie just to see him.
And Ewan McGregor saves the second and third movies. So the British and Irish thespians like coming along.
George Lucas loves him some UK actors, that's for sure. So do you want to tell people where they can find us, Coco,
yes.
To wrap us up?
Yes. So we are so eager to hear from you.
We are.
As long as you say good stuff.
You can, or have money for us.
Right, totally. You can email us at cocoandalts@gmail.com. That's all one word, and the and is spelled out, cocoandalts@gmail.com. We are also on Facebook and Twitter at Coco and Dalts. You can find our website at cocoandalts.com. Drop us a line. Let us know what you want to hear us review in the future. Let us know what you think of our current episodes, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, SoundCloud, Stitcher. Where else are we? Google Play.
Smoke Signals.
Yeah.
Pandora.
Yeah. Did I say Pandora?
Oh, maybe you did.
Maybe I did.
Yeah.
I know we're on a lot of stuff, and we need to have a list so I can tell you, because it's been a hell of a month, people. So I have like reduced bandwidth at the moment.
Well, and that's appropriate. But we've also we started very small. We only had a couple of places where we were, and now we are pretty much everywhere you can get, and we're soon to be on IMDb.
Yes. So keep your eyes peeled for the announcement that we are on IMDb. I mean, it's perfect. It's, synergistic.
Yep.
It's synergistic. We have real reviews, so we need to be on IMDb.
We do.
So that's our podcast. That's episode 66 about Order 66.
And number 67 coming at you will be about the Disney trilogy. And if you've taken anything out of this podcast, you probably have gleaned that that's going to be a doozy of a podcast as we go into depth about the Disney trilogy.
Well, I feel like this was kind of a doozy of a podcast too. Like the episode 65, we were like, yeah, I mean, it's Star Wars. It's awesome. Like, okay, the end,
What can we say?
Rate us on Apple Podcasts,
Yeah.
And this one's...
We're climbing up on 50 minutes now, so...
We gotta go.
That's how much we enjoy talking about the prequel trilogy. So for another episode of the podcast, thank you for joining us. I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Dalts.